All right, a couple things. First, no, I didn't grade the test. You'll get everything back on Monday. You will. All right. What I've tried to do, I gave everybody this handout, is to let you know what's going on, because sometimes it seems like it's kind of scattered. Well, a lot of times. I wasn't imagining we were going to spend the whole week where we were on that database test. All right. But today I'm going to go over Chapter 14. You don't have to, there's an example project. You don't have to do it. It's kind of a piddly little project. And probably you're going to learn very little in this chapter, except there are a couple things I did want to go over. All right, so we're going to do that, and we'll probably be able to do that before the break. Okay, because like I said, it's not a long chapter. Then after the break, we'll get into Chapter 15. What I want to do is I don't want to go, I don't want to just sit there and lecture from now until 4:25. All right, so I'll go until 3 something. We'll see how far we get. And then whatever I don't finish today, I'll start there tomorrow. And also tomorrow I want to go into Chapter 16. All right. Now that's the rest of this week. Next week, if we don't finish Chapter 16 tomorrow, I'll finish that first. All right. And then we're going to go into, as you probably guessed, 17 and 18. All right. All these have example projects. What I'm going to ask you to do, if you please would listen, is do the example project for each chapter that has one. I'll make them worth 25 points. And if you do it, we're going to walk through it as a class. You get 25 points. All right. I'm not going to require anymore that people do the unit tests. Some of you did. Some people had nothing. All right. So then also starting next week, and I guarantee it, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we're going to start on part 1 of this project. All right. So we're going to take that sales orders database. We're going to create it into an MVC 5 database first project. I'm going to ask that you don't do it yourselves and don't do it ahead of time, just because of the fact that I'm going to do things a little bit differently from some of the stuff that we've seen. All right. It'll allow me to incorporate some of the stuff, for example, that's in Chapter 16 of the book. All right, that we'll go over tomorrow. So you'll at least be able to see some of that stuff in action, so to speak. All right. If on Wednesday and Thursday of next week we get as far as I hope we can get, all right, in those 2 class periods, then Friday would just be a lab, all right, where you can sit there and work on all this stuff. So what I try to put in here is what you're going to have do. So these 2 example projects, the ones that we'll go over today and tomorrow, they're not due until a week from tomorrow. That should give you plenty of time. Sometimes people say, well, when is this due? When's that? Well, I gave you the piece of paper, and I'll try to remember to put this up every day when we start class. All right. And so you know what we're doing this week. You know what we're doing the next week. You know what we're doing the following week. All right. So pretty much that gets us through, it's going to get us through the end of October. We're pretty darn close to it. All right. Just so, like I said, you have an idea of what we're doing. The project that we'll do, we're going to have 3 parts. And what's going to happen is I'm going to walk you through a certain amount of it. And then I'm going to say, now I want you to add this. And if you say, how do we do that? You figure out how to do that. All right. It wouldn't be much of a project if all I did was sit there and say, now type in this, now type in this, because it doesn't give you any chance to use any of your own creativity. Now, with a lot of the stuff, it's like today, I gave a hands-on test in the other class. And one of the students, she asked me, she said, I've been trying to do this now for 15 minutes and I can't figure out what it is. And I said, what? And she told me, and I said, did you Google it? She said, yeah, but I don't like the ideas that they gave. Well, then come up with your own idea or try one of theirs. All right? There won't be anything probably exactly if you tried to do something that'll be in Google, that you'll be able to Google it, but I think it'll be enough to get you started. I do want, the idea is some of the stuff you're going to have to start doing on your own. All right? Okay. So that said, like I said, I'm going to go into Chapter 14 right now, which starts on page 345. As I mentioned to you, it's not a long chapter. There is a project in it. Don't even do it. Because all they do is they tell you that 10 divided by 0 is going to produce an exception, a divide by 0 exception. That's the biggest thing out of the chapter, to be honest with you. All right? So again, there's not a whole lot in this particular chapter. Okay, so the author says it gives an overview of the structure and nature of an ASP.NET MVC application, including the default project structure, which you already knew. All right, some of the naming conventions, as it says, some of which are optional, some of which are hard-coded into the way that MVC framework operates, such as, you know that when you create a controller, it's supposed to have the word controller on the end of it. And you know if you do that and you create a controller, that automatically, so if I create a home controller, for example, it's automatically under views going to create at least an empty folder named home. And you know that home views go with the home controller, etc. That's the kind of stuff they talk about. But again, much of it that's in here is so basic that we have touched on it already. All right, either in a lot of detail or at least in some detail. All right. Now, one of the things that they'll mention in here in one of these chapters, and they've talked about it before, is this convention over configuration. And the idea behind that is there are certain ways you are supposed to do things. If you do things that way, the system will be able to basically realize what you're trying to do. I just gave you an example with the naming of controllers, etc. I don't want to go through that again. All right? Okay. So they talk about scaffolding in here. I have created the project that we're going to be working on as a class. I've actually done it 2 or 3 different ways, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it with you. All right? Because I've done it as both an empty project and as one where we create the views using the entity framework. And you might say, well, I like that one, but we're not always going to use everything that's in there. All right? But we'll see as we go on to it next week. So as far as the author is concerned, with this chapter, Chapter 14, this is part 2 of the book. What you're going to find is many of the topics that the author kind of glossed over in the project, he's going to discuss in more detail now, such as, well, chapters 15, 16, and I believe 17, all 3 of those chapters are on controllers. All right, he's got 3 or 4 chapters that are just on views. Okay, so with some of the stuff, he's going to be able to talk about it in a lot of depth and breadth of coverage. All right. He does talk again, and he mentions that he's going to keep going along the lines of when you create a new project, he's just going to make sure that that new project is going to be empty, that virtually everything he creates. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. There's once or twice where he comes in and he says, you know, it's an empty project. Now we're going to create a view. Let's take advantage of the scaffolding, etc. But then he'll say, but I don't like doing that, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right. So, as it says right here, it says when you first create the new project, you know all this. I don't want to bore you. All right. Again, this is the way it used to look back in 2013. This is the screen you got. It's not the same screen that you have right now, but you're all smart enough that you've been able to figure out how to create either an empty MVC project or just the regular type that we've been creating, the ASP.NET web application. All right. He goes through and he talks about the differences as far as what's between these. We looked at this back in probably Chapter 1, so I don't want to go through that again. All right. Now, what is nice in here, in my opinion, is that he does a really good job summarizing in this table that's on 348 and 349. But much of the material that's in here, you've already seen. So let's just talk about stuff that we maybe haven't talked too much about. All right? Such as, well, we haven't been doing it that way because it's not really recommended practice. But AppData, you can actually put your databases right in there. Okay? It's harder to move them. It's harder to do certain things when you've got the database in there. And we haven't been doing it that way. I've been doing it the way that they've been doing it in St. Louis and the way that, again, they want to keep us together. All right? App Start. Well, you already know most of the stuff that's in there because we have talked about it already. What we are going to be talking about really What all of the next chapter is, the entire next chapter, chapter 15 of this book, talks about how you can go in and tweak the route config.cs file that's in AppStart. And it probably gives you about 15 or 20 different ways that he does it. All right, so we'll be talking about those in just a little bit. In chapter 16, we're going to get into areas. What you can do with areas is you can basically, for lack of better words, create like an MVC project inside of an MVC project. So sometimes what people do is they take something, for example, like maybe an admin type of thing. So if you're going to have an administration area, they put it in its own area. All right, we'll talk about that when we get to that chapter. Bin, I'm not going to go through. Content, I'm not going to go through. You know what controllers are, what models are, scripts, etc. We've talked about all that stuff. All right, I don't think there's the only other thing, and again, I know we've talked about this a little, but just so you see it, and that's that global ASAX file. That's the file that runs. What's inside of that file is a call to the method application start. So that's what runs. It's kind of like main that we had for C# programs last semester, but it runs, and what it does in there is it calls route config, it calls areas, it calls a few other things. All right? All right, understanding these conventions, again, it's what we mentioned before. You know, naming controller classes, naming views, etc. All right, I'm not, like I said, I don't think it's really worth going into that again. Okay? All right. I'm assuming that right now you understand the difference, if you look up on the screen or in your books on page 351, that you understand the difference between those two layout statements. All right, I'm just taking for granted that people get that. Maybe that's a bad thing to take for granted. But again, the first one says that you're using the shared layout. We're used to calling it underscore layout.cshtml. Guess what? You don't have to call it that. You know, you literally could call it anything you want, but it should be housed in the views shared folder. Okay, an underscore layout, and it should start with an underscore. Why? Because the system expects that. All right, and underscore layout is just a common name that is used. But for example, maybe I've got one layout for one department, one layout for another department. Maybe the colors are different, the font, for whatever reason. Okay, so I could call them, you know, like underscore payroll layout or layout payroll or whatever if I wanted to do that. All right, then they go into debugging. All right, and I'm not even, I went through this, but let's just take a look at what's in there. All right. Now he talks about using the test folder. For what he puts in here, it's not even worth doing it. Okay, but we will talk about what's in here. He has you come in and create a really simple controller. Again, this is the kind of thing we did in week 1. All right, and notice you've even got variables and stuff right in your index method. All right, so you got first val equals 10, and you've got second val equal 5, and result is first val divided by second val. All right, so what is going to happen is, once we get to the view in just a minute, it's basically going to say 10 divided by 5 equal 2. Okay, nothing big there, etc. All right, so you go in there, and this is what he has. Okay, the calculation result is 2. All right. Now there's a few things in there we haven't done it this way before, such as, well, notice up on top we've got @model_int, okay, which is basically says we are working with integers, and here we've got @model. Okay, he's showing you another way you can do things. It's not normally done this way, but in an application that's as trivial as the one the author is creating here, you could do it this way. All right. All right. Then he comes in and he talks about the debugger. Now, again, one of the reasons I didn't want to spend real much time on this is much of the stuff that he puts in here is wrong, because Visual Studio changed the way they did things between Visual Studio 2013 and 2015. He was using 2013. At that time, when you went into the web.config file, this debug option was set to false. So if you wanted it to, that means run it without debugging. Now it defaults to true. Now, if you want to run your program, and if for whatever reason you don't want it to stop when it finds errors, I don't know why you do that, but maybe there's a reason, or you think you've got a good reason for that. You can go into the web.config file, and it's the big one down at the bottom, not the one under views, and you can change that manually under system.web from true to false. All right. And this is what he explains in here. If it's not enabled, typically what's going to happen is when you start to run it, it'll come up with something that looks like this. And if you do hit this radio button, what it does is it goes back and it changes that to true. All right, if you have manually changed it to false. And that's what he explains in here. All right. So I'm not sure about this or not, so I do want to bring up the project I bring up won't matter at all. I don't even know if I still have this one on here or not. I think I called it garbage or something like that. And it looks like I don't. I'll just create a new one. It's fine. Just to show you 2 or 3 things, then we're literally are done with this chapter. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the stuff that he went through because, like I said, most of those examples, I think you all know what 10 divided by 5 is. All right? But if I come in here and as an example, if I go in under controllers, and let's just say I come in and I add a new controller, it'll be empty. In fact, we'll make it views and empty any framework. That's fine. Add and model class. I'm not even sure. I'm just going to call that. I don't have anything yet, so I don't know if it might break. In fact, you know what? I'm not even going to do this. I'll go under here and I'll just create a class. All right. All right. What he gets to in this section is if I've got code in here like this. All right. Let's just say I'm gonna just throw in some C#. Bless you. Num1 equal 10, int num2 equal 5, int result equal num1 divided by num2. All right, again, I realize nothing big there, nothing that you don't already understand there. But again, I'm thinking you know this, but I could always be wrong. That if I decide when I come in here, all right, you can reference, okay. You don't like that either. All right, that's fine. What I'm trying to get to here is when you come through here and you do this, if you want to set a breakpoint, there's 2 ways to do it. All right, I can take my mouse and I can click in what's called the gutter area right here, and boom, I've set a breakpoint. No big thing. That turns it on. Clicking it again turns it off. The other thing I can do is click anywhere on the line and choose breakpoint, and it does the same exact thing. Insert breakpoint. Well, again, no big thing. What I hope that you understand, though, is if I were to run this program, okay, so if I come in here and try to run this program, okay, and it's going to stop right here. But if it stops on this line, on line 12, all right, line 12 has not yet executed. So in other words, num1 will be 10, num2 will be 5, but result was never set. Does that make sense? Because that's pretty much what he's saying in here. All right. So again, he shows you the same two ways to create a breakpoint that I just showed you. All right. There are some things in here that, for lack of better words, are kind of cool. Because he runs it, okay, and notice it's got here result 0. Well, he's pretty much put the same stuff I put in, except I call them num1 and num2. All right. But notice the system's smart enough that it's given 0. It's not null. It's given 0. All right, because it's a numeric value. All right. Once you go and you pass this, so once you have, if I put the breakpoint here, for example, in the view bag line, then once I put my mouse over result, it gives the correct result. No pun intended. That's the same thing we talked about before. Now, again, because I don't know when we went over some of this stuff last semester how much you do or you do not remember. But if you look in here, when you work with the debugger, there's a lot of different things that you can do in here, such as this is called the locals window that you see on the screen. What that does is it shows you every local variable or every variable that's inside the method you're currently in. And it has its current value, and it has the type of variable it is. So when you come in there and you do that, and you go into the locals window, you can click on these in here, and you can put what's in there, what's called a watch. So as the program goes and you're stepping through different lines, it'll automatically show you just that variable and how it's changing. All right. So really the last thing that he talks about in here is this is where he purposely adds this error. Second value equals 0, and then he does the divide. All right. And when you do it, you get this. This is what's called the exception. God bless you. This is what's called the exception assistant. All right. And what it has in there is the line where the system figures the error is, and then it's got the information that goes with it. All right. You can open it up and you can find more things on this, if you want to or need to. All right. Now, what he says in the next section, because we're just about done, is wrong. Because this is totally changed. But he's got in here enabling edit and continue. Edit and continue is a feature that's on now by default. All right. He tells you to go in there and it says, you can go into options, Visual Studio. You can do that. You've got to dig into it a little bit more than what he shows here. But if I go in there, stop the run here, and I go into Tools, options, okay. Tools, options. He says, oh yeah, when you go in there, it's right here. Not anymore. All right. Again, you've got to go into wherever he says general or whatever, and you've got to go down a little bit, but it's on by default. All right. So he says what? Sure. So go to edit under general, he says. I think that is where it is. Maybe not. I mean, I went through all this stuff to look for it, and it is in here. I guess for lack of better words, you'll have to take my word for it. But it's on by default. Okay? So he talks about how you can go in there and you can turn it on. It's on. Then he talks about another way that you can turn it on by going to project, going over to properties. All right? And then in here, there's an option too. That's the other one that he goes through. And that one's already on. All right, so the project properties, select the debug and find it. All right, under debug web. So it's under web. And if you look here, and I know it's there, enable, edit, and continue. It's turned on already. So he makes a big thing about it. So who cares? Well, as an example, and this is what he ends this chapter with, is he says, since you've got edit and continue, he goes in and purposely puts in this error. Okay? And right now the program blows up. And it blows up because it tries to go on and it executes this line, and that view bag line is what makes it blow up. All right. It's actually dividing by 0, but it's the view bag that triggers it. So he goes and comments that out, and when you look, when he does the edit and continue, what you are able to do is while the program's running, it'll break right there. But you can go down to the next line, and this is what he has you do. All right. So he goes in and he says to you what you should do is you should come in here. Let me close this. He has you change this to 0, and the program blows up. All right. But then he says, you know what? With edit and continue on, if you've already hit this line, you can't go back and change that line in the middle of your run. But what you can do, and this is what he does, is he comes back and he manually changes that to 5. And he tells the program to continue. And when it does, it's in the same session it was in, and it keeps going. Does that make sense? And if you might say, yeah, it makes sense, why the heck would you want to do that? If you're running a really complex program, much more complex than what we've been writing, all right, that literally is dealing, let's say it's an ASP.NET 5 program, and you're dealing with an entire company, and you've got, hundreds of controllers or whatever, what you probably don't want to have happen is if something unexpected happens, you don't want the program to just puke out and stop. Maybe to run it and test it, you have to test it for hours or at least minutes. You don't want to be halfway through it and have it break where you can't do anything and you have to start all over again. So that's what edit and continue allows you to do. All right? And that pretty much is, I think, what he talks about in here. He mentions this browser link. What you can do, again, if you don't know this, then shame on me. But if you go over to where is it? Right here, we've got debug and we've got any CPU. All right, when you go in here, you can go in, not right now, but because it's I don't have any GUI. But if you got a GUI, you can choose multiple browsers at the same time. All right, and if you choose multiple browsers at the same time and you tell the program to run, it'll open up. Let's say I choose Chrome, Firefox, and I don't know, IE. It'll open up 3 different windows. So I can see it run in 3 different windows at once. All right? And you might say, well, who cares? Why don't I just, But that's what he says. So he goes there, chooses to browse with, and it'll only find the browsers that you've got in there that you've actually got loaded. You can also run internal web browser, which will basically mimic a browser, so if you don't have any browsers loaded. All right? The page inspector, we don't go through that in here, but that is something that you can go through that was used a lot more in web forms than it is in MVC. It allowed you to go through, and as you cycle through, it would show you the different stages, load, preload, post-load, etc., that your program was in. And that's it. Like I said, maybe that was a waste. I don't know.